This is no work for a soldier, said Saint Regent. I joined the army to get out of farming. Did you gripe that much in the army? Carbone asked. Only until they made me a general. You enjoy the work better if you served aboard ship. Once you survived battle with the enemy, the sea offers you a second chance to die. It wouldn't make me any more wet. The rain had begun at dusk and settled into a monotonous drizzle, icy and glutinous. It dripped off their slouch brims, their noses too, and the ropey mud of the boulevard clung to their boots and made them heavy as sledges. It turned a level stretch into an uphill climb. The date was 24 December 1800, 4 Nivose, year 8 by the revolutionary calendar. The traffic was heavy despite the weather. France had cut the heads off priests and abolished religion, but even a dozen years of austerity, Parisians insisted on celebrating Christmas Eve. Twice now, Carbone had almost been run down by carriages bearing drunken revelers toward the Rue Saint-Nicaise. After the second near miss, he cajoled Saint Regent and Limoillan to step down from the cart and help him with the lame, wind-broken mare. Carbone, a naval veteran and one admittedly inclined toward recklessness for the sheer thrill of it, nevertheless considered his companions bad risks. Saint Regent, most recently a common bandit, had found that occupation more to his liking than his late service to the king, at the expense of his commitment to the case, and Limoillan's lust for vengeance was the very thing that had led the despised regicides to ruination. If this plan had a flaw, it was his partner's. Shit! Limoillan stepped in a hole, turning his ankle and slamming his shoulder first against the cart. It lurched. Something heavy shifted under the sodden pile of hay. Carbone snatched his arm. Watch your step, ass. You want to blow us all to ashes? A week earlier, on 17 Fremar, December 17th to the rest of Europe, a grain dealer named Lambel had admitted to his shop in the Rue Meslay a thick-set man with a blond beard and a large scar above his left eye. He walked with a rolling gait that spoke of years at sea. The man paused, breathing in the sweet smell of oats and wheat preserved in barrels, an odor the merchant himself no longer noticed. Will you hear a proposition? That would depend on the proposition, said Lambel. I sell textiles. I recently came into possession of a shipment of brown sugar, which I hope to barter for bolts of cloth in Brittany. You have no problem selling that lot in Paris. The women in Toulouse would scratch out each other's eyes for 3 yards of muslin. For silk, they would do murder, and I don't exaggerate. At the moment, I have no way of transporting either the sugar or the cloth. I understand you have a horse and cart for sale. I have for a fact. Will you take 200 francs? I would. Lambel was under no illusion that the man was trading either cloth or sugar. He had been too quick to offer the money without inspecting the horse and cart. More likely his cargo was English port or some other product outlawed by government embargo. But the times were too uncertain to quibble over a fellow's motives, and Marguerite, the mare, was very old and had cataracts. He helped the man with the scar hitch her up and watch him lead her out of the barn behind his place of business. The man with the scar stopped at the wine shop, where he bought a spare Macon cask large enough to contain 60 gallons. Once again, the customer explained that he intended to transport sugar. The proprietor helped him load the cask aboard the cart. From there, he went to a shed he'd rented in the Rue des Paradis near Saint-Lazare. He drew the doors shut, but they were joined poorly, and neighbors had a largely unobstructed view of what went on inside. One did not trespass, of course. Was a curious fellow resident no better than a voyeur? But there were few enough entertainments at the best of times, and most of them taxed by the Republic. A free show was not a subject of question. The spectacle taking place across the narrow street was not without curiosity. When 2 more men appeared and set to work reinforcing the cask with 10 stout iron bands, conversing in whispers all the while, it was assumed they were brandy smugglers, hardly an unusual sight that time of year, when a dram was just the thing to drive the cold from one's bones, even at black market prices. The neighbors paid them little attention after that. The mystery was explained, and as for reporting the activity, there was no telling what miseries may follow any kind of contact with the authorities, however civic-minded. Madame Guillotine seldom distinguished between accuser and accused. Francois Carbone was neither a cloth merchant nor a brandy smuggler, but a Brittany-born sailor who came by his fearsome scar when a line broke loose during a storm in the Channel, and the frayed end struck him above the eye, gouging out flesh like a piece of grape shot. He had no sugar in his possession. He trained in the proper use of firearms and explosive under Georges Cadoudal, a French royalist who operated a camp for insurgent expatriates in England, on the estate of a British peer in sympathy with the restoration of the Bourbon monarchy in France, where, after all, might it end? George III in exile or executed, and the American parvenu Thomas Jefferson in charge of the empire, as well as a bishop? Although still in his 30s, Carbone had seen the government of his adopted country change hands 3 times. He was determined to make it 4. The 2 men seen working with him on the cask were Pierre Robineau de Saint-Régent and a master cooper named Jardin, who'd been recruited to forge the fashion the iron bands. Jardin thought the cask stout enough for its purpose, the storage of wine, but a job was a job, and the man with the scar paid up front in cash, not promises or poultry. Saint-Régent wore his civilian attire with the air of a uniform, snug and tidy with nothing dangling loose, his handkerchief tucked inside his sleeve. He served as a divisional general under Cadoudal and knew little of casks and cart horses. A 4th man, who visited the shed from time to time, was later identified as Joseph Pierre de Limoillan, an aristocrat who's seen his father born, fettered, and beaten past jeering crowds to the Place de la Révolution to have his head taken from his shoulders. Cadoudal, a conservative commander not given toward impulsive promotions, had made Limoillan a major general after return from patrol, swinging the head of a Jacobin leader by the hair. Individual initiative must be rewarded. When the cooper left, Limoillan stood watch by the door while Carbone and Saint-Régent drew the sacking off 2 kegs and poured black powder into the cask. They scooped broken and jagged pieces of stone from a barrel and mixed them with the powder to slash flesh and pulverize bone, explained Limoillan, who suggested the refinement and make as many good revolutionaries as possible. On Christmas Eve, a street musician strummed a mandolin and sang the refrain of a Catholic hymn outlawed in 1789. He frowned at the small collection of coins in his upturned hat, slung it onto his head without spilling them, a gesture perfected through repetition, and trudged off through the drizzle. Behind him, his corner of the Place des Carrousels glimmered in the night of torches, struggling against the rain in front of the Tuileries Palace. Through these same gates, 8 years before, King Louis XVI's own gunner had escorted their sovereign to the place of imprisonment and from there to his execution. The musician passed 3 men loitering beside a shabby cart piled with hay, 2 of them knocking their heels against the wooden wheels to dislodge mud from their soles, a 3rd squatting to feel the fetlocks of a bay mare that didn't look as if it would make it to the end of the street. Poor buggers, he thought to himself. All he had to look after was his mandolin. A patrol of National Guardsmen came along a few minutes later in their blue uniforms, with shining oilcloth cloaks, observing the trio still engaged in the same activity. The heightened presence of the sentries suggested that their man at Toulouse, no king, this Limoillan thought merely a contemptible clerk appointed to govern his betters, was preparing to venture out. The plotter's intelligence was sound. The patrol slowed as it approached. Seized with a wicked whim, Carbone gestured with his short-barreled pipe, what the English called a bulldog. "Have you a light?" The guardsman hesitated, shook his head, and continued walking with his companions. Was that necessary? Limoillan was the bloodthirstiest of the three and therefore most cautious. I judged it so. In another moment he'd have been searching the cart. This way he knows we have nothing to hide. What if he'd given you a light and searched anyway? Have you ever tried to get a spark out of a flint and steel on a night like this? You mistake audacity for valor. It will mean your death. Sound advice from a highwayman. Limoillan did not respond. If this plan had a flaw, the rash sailor was it. But Carbon was in command, and he swallowed his retort. He and Saint Rejane had spent many such dismal night waiting to waylay coaches on the stage road along the coast, an unbecoming pursuit for generals, but even the great causes needed financing, same as mummery shows and ladies' wardrobes. For Saint Rejane, his alliance with Carbon as sailor adventurer unhinged from reason by a blow at sea, and Limoillan, a fanatic who would usher in a new reign of terror, only with the executioners and the victims reversed in favor of the monarchy, was far from ideal. If this plan had a flaw, it was they. The clouds were bottomless. Foul drizzles soaked the conspirators to the skin and chilled them to the bone. Perfect weather, Limoillan thought, for a funeral of state. Moving more quickly before another patrol could appear, the men backed the cart into position, not quite blocking the street, but obliging any passing traffic to slow and swerve around it. Carbone and Saint Rejane tilted the heavy cask, while Limoillan unwound the oilcloth from a twisted length of twine and inserted in the hole drilled in the top. The fuse was impregnated with gunpowder, the fast-burning variety intended for muskets. How much time? Saint Rejane helped right the cast. Carbone's teeth ground on his pipe stem. Who's to say? The bastard is always early. Ask the Austrians. I meant the fuse. Then say what you mean. 6 seconds, give or take. Give or take what? Limoillan asked. Give or take the life of one Corsican, more or less. Saint Rejane crossed himself, an automatic gesture. Carbon smiled in the darkness. Careful, my friend. We are surrounded by atheists. Limoillan did not smile. In a little while, they'll be surrounding themselves.